I'm standing here in northern Israel at Tel Dan, which is an ancient society, an ancient place built by the Canaanites originally. And like many sites here in the Holy Land, there have been many different kingdoms that have dwelt in this place all the way through until even the Byzantine period, about the 4th or 5th century AD. But when we come to Dan, we're mindful of several things with respect to geography as well as Bible truth. First of all, we're mindful of the fact that the word Jordan or Jordan reminds us that these are the waters that come from Dan. The Jordan River comes from Dan, the springs of this area, and those springs are fed from Mount Hermon, which is just over to the north and to the east of us today. The snow cap produces the water flow, and the largest spring in all of the Mideast is right here a few hundred yards from where I stand. Hence, the Promised Land was a place that, while we may look at it and see it as plain and ordinary, throughout the Middle East it was an amazing place of promise and blessing, partly because of the water supply that God had placed here. Directly behind me is the country of Lebanon. And of course, we think of Lebanon, we hear of Hezbollah, we think of Syria just a few miles from here, we think of ISIS, and even today we are aware of Russian troops and Iranian troops coming this close to Israel. And we'll talk about that in future videos. But needless to say, this is a significant place in ancient and modern times. However, I want to take you back to a period of time, about 950 BC, to the time when King Jeroboam reigned in the north, the northern kingdoms. And something significant took place right here at this altar. And we read about it in 1 Kings chapter 12 and 26. We're mindful of the fact that Judges says the kingdom would be from Dan to Beersheba. Jeroboam was here in Dan reigning. And it says, "And Jeroboam said in his heart, Now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then shall the heart of this people turn again unto their Lord, even unto Rehoboam the king of Judah, and they shall kill me, and go again to Rehoboam king of Judah." Here we see a worried man, a man with a large ego, with a desire to control. And rather than let the people obey God and go to Jerusalem, he decides to erect an altar right here in Dan. He took counsel and he made 2 calves of gold. And the Bible says he placed one altar in Bethel and one altar in Dan. But it says also in verse 30, "And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan." And we find that even as Jeroboam would have approached this false altar, his back would have been to Jerusalem. He turned his back on God because of a heart of fear, because of a desire to control. And as pride lifted him up, the Bible tells us that back in Bethel he was confronted by a prophet. He was given there the judgment sentence, and ultimately his bones were taken even by Josiah because of the prophecy that was made against Jeroboam. Many people suffered, and really history tells us that the northern tribes continually found their way into paganism because of the sins of one generation following down to the next generation. I believe all of us can learn from Dan that we don't need to try to do it our way. If God says go to Jerusalem, and if that's inconvenient, we need to do what God tells us to do. And in these final days, as Russia and as Iran are right here in Syria, and as tension fills our world, this is not the time to do it our way. This is the time to serve God His way.